Welcome everybody to the Ogden Way podcast, a place where we talk about Ogden stories through the lens of Ogden's people. Today we're joined by Sarah Kapel. Sarah is the conservation director of the Ogden Nature Center. You're the ecologist for the Nature Center as well, right?
Yes, I'm the on-site ecologist. Yeah.
On-site and on-staff.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nature Center obviously is a place where we value and enjoy, but also manage wildlife and their habitats, right?
Right.
Which is something that I have a long background in before being mayor.
Yep.
So today we're going to flip the script.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah reached out to my office asking a whole bunch of questions.
Yes.
And of which I was happy to provide answers, but I felt like the answers were maybe a little longer than just an email or a quick response. I thought that she deserved to know more about where I came from and why. But one of the things that we talk about in the Ogden Way is the Ogden Way is a framework that connects all of us. And the thing that struck me about the questions you were asking me is that you and I landed in the same place in terms of having the same passion and values, but we came from different pathways to the same place. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to talk more about that today, but
Yeah.
rather than me interviewing you, we're going to let Sarah interview me. And Sarah, are you nervous about that?
I mean, I prefer it.
Okay.
I always tell people that I like to work with trees and plants because they don't talk back to me, so I don't have to talk to them.
Right.
But
and I tried to set you at ease by telling you that people call me a tree because of my shape and my size.
Yep.
So,
and I'm a hobbit because of my shape and size.
So hopefully that brings you some peace, but
yeah.
I'll turn the keys over to you and just let you ask me whatever you want. But.
Yes. Well, I just had a couple of questions because of your background. So how has your experience with wildlife management influenced your approach to policy making? And in what ways do you think it gives you a unique perspective on addressing the challenges Ogden faces?
Actually, a really good friend of mine was just promoted to director of the Division of Wildlife just recently. Mm-hmm. And so before he even applied, he called and asked me my advice, et cetera. And one of the things I told him was that I said, that job's going to be a lot more political than my job as mayor. So I'm the mayor of a major city in Utah, and there's a lot of politics in that job. And so wildlife's very political, primarily because it involves people and passion. Mm-hmm. That's when things get political. People have strong feelings for or against something, it becomes political, right? And so we all know that wildlife is something that the people of Utah value tremendously. There's a lot of different opinions around wildlife, and that creates a lot of passion and contention. Mm-hmm. And so I actually come from a job that you wouldn't think would have any relation to being a mayor of a major city. But it actually does because of all the conflict management that we had to do in that industry. And so I think about policies differently as a result. I don't write policies in order to avoid conflict, but the conflict always is rooted to people and passion and purpose. And so my mindset is maybe a little different paradigm with policy. I absolutely view it from the lens of the people, the endpoint, the end user, who are we targeting to serve with the policies and decisions we're making. And that was always our perspective. A lot of people think you're doing it only to benefit the wildlife, but if what the wildlife needs doesn't benefit the people of Utah, it's defeating its purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And so at DWR, we have a strong culture and ethos around hooks and bullets conservation. And so we have a mindset of making sure that wildlife is beneficial to people to use as a resource, right? Mm-hmm. And so our conservation actions are really, really dedicated to making that a helpful, valuable resource to people.
Right.
And that's the paradigm I apply here as well.
Right. And I mean, a lot of the hunting tags, a portion of that will go to research. A lot of it goes to conservation. And so it is this feedback where you might think it's just about your personal gain of hunting this animal. It might be, but, there's ways that we tax it in a way that we see the benefits on the other side, and then research goes back into it.
Right.
So.
And the North American model of wildlife management is really rooted around the hunting and fishing permits the excise taxes that are collected at the national level and distributed to the states. And those revenues are user-based, right? It's a form of user fee. And so those that use the resource are the ones that benefit from it as well.
Right.
And so there's this feedback of investment and then return for those of us that value and use the resource. And that's important because it brings people and the policies and in this case, the animals into really close alignment. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. Hunters and anglers feel like they are the original conservationists because they are. That's how conservation was created in North America, all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt and even before. You can read all about the history of Pinchot and Roosevelt, et cetera, and protecting land, protecting space, and protecting wildlife through conservation, through hunting and fishing. But what comes with it also is an intrinsic ethos, like a intrinsic value of wildlife watching, being out in the landscape amongst the habitats, right? Whether you're harvesting or not harvesting, there's something that draws you out there, and it could be the pursuit or the hunt or the catch,
right?
Or it could just be to view it before you pursue it, to hunt or to catch. You know what I mean?
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's important that people value wildlife and the habitats they occupy, regardless of why, right?
Right.
So I think that's a role that the Nature Center can play an important role in terms of educating people on the value of wildlife and their habitats while supporting every avenue and pathway to that love, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for some people that come to the Nature Center, it's their first time seeing a deer. We have a healthy population of deer or fox or, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's a way to connect them to the nature, and then maybe they'll grow and appreciate and pick up hobbies, and or make it a lifestyle like I have.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Make it a career even.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Are there specific initiatives or partnerships you're working on to increase public awareness or engagement around conservation efforts in the city?
So in my past, I was accustomed to protecting and preserving and actively managing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or even millions of acres of wildlife habitat and landscape. That's the scale at which I'm accustomed to operating. So whether that's actively managing and making habitat improvements on the landscape, restoration post-fire, or something that you guys do at the Nature Center using beaver dam analogs to look similar to what a beaver does ecologically, or even using beavers themselves. I've done a lot of river restoration. So some of those things apply to being a mayor in a city like ours. Most of them do not.
Right.
So we're at the confluence of two major rivers, the Ogden and the Weaver River. In my past, I was really heavily involved in the $6 million restoration project in our downtown of the Ogden River. And there's a lot of that same work continuing on in the Weber and in the lower reaches of the Ogden. So that passion continues. But when you talk about wildlife landscapes and habitats, you have to talk about access to them. And for us here in this city, we don't have a huge breadth of, big game or herd management or anything like that. But we do play an important role for access through trails, public access to making sure that those are publicly available and accessible trails, making sure that there's as much accessibility access to opportunities like the Kingfisher wetlands down on the pathway project, right? Making sure that our pathway is smooth and available to anybody with varying abilities, etc. To me, those are more of an urban setting way of providing access to opportunities to be outdoors, to be amongst wildlife. Those riparian zones are some of the most species-rich and diverse habitat types that exist. They are, trying to remember some numbers, but probably 85% of the species in Utah use riparian zones, but they only occupy probably a percent or two of the total land cover in the state of Utah, so they're very rich areas. And that's also where our pathways go. And so it's a great opportunity to put people in contact with wildlife, but also doing it in a way that's very active, that helps to provide active and healthy lifestyles, because that's really important for our health. And then finally, and basically what I'm doing right now is relaying my old work with the fundamental pillars of the Ogden Way. It's around infrastructure, access to open spaces, having opportunities to have an active and healthy lifestyle. But also in those areas, you'll find a lot of people. And so you're having access to all of those opportunities, including having interactions with one another and creating meaningful interactions and touch points with each other, which really is what builds us into a community. So wildlife is something that brings people together. It's something that has value, whether you provide a dollar amount to it or not. It's an intrinsic value that can't be measured. And it also is it's the resource of value that makes our outdoor recreation so valuable, either as a visitor or as a resident, right? So there's tons of overlap, but it just has got these different perspectives to it and a different lens. And so the users and the residents of Ogden, a lot of them probably see it a little bit differently than I do, just because of how they come to it. But it doesn't mean that I don't value it anymore, or that they don't value it any more than I do, right? It's important to all of us for a whole number of reasons. And what we often forget is that we've got to listen to each other and understand each other in order to know where we're coming from.
Right.
And that's why we're doing this podcast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And that kind of leads to this question of how do you balance the need for urban development and growth with the preservation of Ogden's natural resources and outdoor spaces?
So to me, I think it's a matter of having, you have to have access to these quality of life amenities if you want to be a community where you want to, if you want to be a community where you want to raise your family, a community where we have healthy and happy, active lifestyles, you know what I mean? And so some of that can be done through inner city, like in the city parks, but it's not good enough to just have a park. A lot of the feedback we hear is that we don't have enough amenities at our parks. And so we've got a lot of investment to make in individual parks to make sure they have the amenities that draw people to them. If you don't have the amenities like the playground or the ball field, et-cetera, we find that our people just don't use it. And when people don't use it, they end up getting used by some people for the wrong reasons. Yeah. Then it becomes a detriment to a neighborhood, right? But if we look at our parks in terms of a fundamental element of a healthy neighborhood and making sure that we have access through infrastructure that connects to those parks with the homes and neighborhoods throughout our city, and in the same way connects our schools and our places of worship, et cetera, with our homes and our neighbors. If you look at it in that context of a healthy neighborhood, open space and parks are critical. Then the question is how much, right? How accessible, and how much do you put into each one? And that's kind of a policy choice that we have to make with the investments that we can. But even bigger than that, we have other open spaces that are not necessarily a pocket park or a neighborhood park. Right. We've got access to the foothills, which to me is non-negotiable. It has to be protected. It has to be provided for the public benefit. I don't see any building opportunities on the foothill like that. I think it's far too valuable in terms of recreation and an outdoor opportunity for our whole city. That's part of what makes our city special. And then of course the parkways for the rivers I've spent a career protecting those.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's neat about Ogden and about a lot of Utah cities is the access to mountains that you have. So you have to kind of protect that because I swear it's only here that you could just go for a hike after work and go up a canyon and explore.
And really where we have challenges isn't necessarily making sure that there's access, it's managing the competing uses of the same areas. For example, we see a lot of conflict between golfers and trail users. Not a lot, some. Not a lot. I shouldn't say a lot because the overwhelming majority of people respect the ethics of trail use. Right. They don't wander off onto unofficial trails or build new trails where they're not intended to be. Right. But this is something that I encountered a lot when I worked at the state is there's different users of the same places. And we've got to manage the difference and manage it in a way that allows for everybody to enjoy their opportunities out there. Just because you don't mountain bike doesn't mean it's not mountain biking is not valuable. Same should be said for the golfers. If you love to mountain bike or trail run, but you don't love to golf, you should still respect that they're out in the mountains, in the outdoors, enjoying it in their own way, achieving an active and healthy lifestyle, doing it with friends and neighbors to create those meaningful connections with one another, right? Those are all part and parcel, part of the Ogden Way, but we all do it in a little bit different way. And so for us, our role is making sure that there's access to the opportunities, but also that we're managing all of those varying opportunities so that there's less and less conflict and competing interests between the competing interests. They're not competing, they're all one and the same, but they're in that same space. And so it's important that we don't set it up to have divisiveness in our community because we want to be outdoors, right?
Well, and it could be challenging to do that in a sustainable way too. Going back to the more natural side of our world, the wildlife and other natural intrinsic values that we have, it can be hard to balance all that and be sustainable.
Right. And that's part of why we have trails master plans and why we have trail experts putting trails where they ought to be and not where they shouldn't be. So when the new trails pop up that are not official, it might be for somebody's convenience.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's there and that it's healthy for the landscape. And so that could be really erosive, for example. They could put a trail through Big Game Winter Range, for example. They could put it through riparian zone, which is the most sensitive ecotype around. And so there's reasons for the things that we do. It's not to be jerks or whatever. It's just to create opportunity in our community and then making sure that people have access to those opportunities, which is fundamental to the Ogden Way. And if we are picking winners and losers and that some people get to have access because they enjoy one way, but others don't, then I think we're violating our principles of the Ogden Way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I know one thing that I'm challenged with at the Nature Center is we have this wildlife preserve, in the middle of developed area. And so it can lead to a lot of problems where, we can't quite let wildlife be wildlife. You mentioned beavers earlier. We have a beaver population. We love them. But if they cause, flooding, that's of a concern. We can't have that. And then one of the biggest challenges is our water quality, which we see is pretty poor. Just our waterways are right off of major roads or major development areas. And so we'll see high oil content in our water, or we'll see pretty low dissolved oxygen where we really can only support, some macroinvertebrate aquatic life. And we don't see the healthy waterways, and they ultimately feed the ponds and wetlands that we have at the Nature Center. And so it can be a real challenge because it's, we have to preserve that area for the wildlife that live there, but we have a growing pressure of the community around us from development and from urbanization.
So when I hear you talk about that, it reminds me of kind of where we started the interview around the intersection between wildlife and people, habitats and landscapes and people. And we talked about hooks and bullets ethos for conservation. That comes with a really strong ethos of hands-on active management. Because if you're managing in the presence of and on behalf of people, you can't really just set it and forget it. Meaning you can't just put a boundary around it, let it do its own thing, and then just stay away. Where's the value for the people who live in and amongst those habitats? You know what I mean? And so there comes a time in that setting that you've got to be active and be hands-on in your management of the resource to make sure that it's providing the maximum benefit both for the wildlife and the resource and for the people that enjoy it. And so that's clearly the case for your setting. And that's one of the things I really like about the Nature Center is it's an opportunity to show that active and hands-on management like beaver dam analogs. I've been on both sides of the beavers. They can be the most beneficial animal in existence. They do so much as ecosystem engineers, right? That's why they call them a keystone species. They are critical to life beyond themselves, many, many times over. I've also been on the other side where they are plugging up irrigation infrastructure and getting in the way of food production for local farmers and local buyers of food. You know what I mean? And so they can be the greatest critter or the worst, depending on the setting. That's where beaver dam analogs come along It's a system of structures, requires a lot of roll up your sleeves,
Right.
pick and shovel work to put them into place, but it mimics the ecosystem functions of a beaver without getting all of the downsides of their conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that for the Nature Center, you're always gonna have those challenges, especially as urbanization continues to grow around you. Those challenges will become greater and greater, but so does the responsibility to manage actively, hands-on, roll up your sleeves, pick and shovel in response, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great opportunity to share with the community the importance of conservation work. It's not just set it and forget it.
Right.
You can't just protect it by forgetting about it. Not if you want to do it for the benefit of people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, these processes take time, even in a natural setting. So if you're, trying to mimic with an active restoration method, it's going to take time, and you have to.
And those are the things that are going to be required. If you want to we do have stormwater that comes into our city, into our streets, into our stormwater system,
right,
makes its way to the Nature Center eventually.
Yes.
And I'm assuming you're probably monitoring water quality through the macroinvertebrate community, right? Looking for more Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, and Trichoptera. If you don't have those three, right, then you don't have quality water. Yeah. And it's the hands-on actions like the beaver dam analogs that are going to get you the EPT species, right, and not the ones that you currently have, right? Yeah, or lack thereof. Yeah. Or lack thereof, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We also do water quality testing through the state water watch program. And we do that across, and that's great to see kind of the fluxes as water. Our water is agriculture canals, so it's turned off for the season right now, and you can see as things change. But yeah, it's always a challenge because we can only do so much on our 150 acres, so we have very responsible neighbors, but development in itself has a pollution cost. It can. We see. But getting back to our earlier conversation about the Ogden River Restoration Project, what are the values from my past that apply to my current? We actually have, and this, again, getting back to the point of hooks and bullets and the ethos that comes with it, we have long had a city engineer who's now my director of public services, Justin Anderson. He has hunted and fished his entire life. Growing up, his dad took him all the time, and so he brings that ethos to his work. And what that means is when he's planning stormwater projects, for example, he thinks about the impact on the fishery in the river. And so he's been putting in place policies, but also projects that do stormwater retention and polish the water before they go into our rivers. And so we actually have non-jurisdictional, that's a term in wetland management, non-jurisdictional wetlands, which means that they're not regulated as a wetland by the Army Corps of Engineers, but they mimic the same function ecologically as a wetland would. And therefore cleaning the water that's coming off of our streets before it goes into our river and then flows downstream and then diverted and heading toward the Nature Center, for example. Yeah. Right? Yeah, we actually have a stormwater treatment wetland. Right. And Justin helped my predecessor get permission for that. There you go. But yeah, my predecessor was the one that started that, and then I took the position over, and we built a mimic wetland. It's got some work ahead of it. You have to vegetate it. Yep. But that was kind of the goal, is to treat, since wetlands act as natural filtration systems, might as well have a wetland there. It provides wildlife habitat, and then everything about the Nature Center is always about education. And so I always take that as a win. If nothing else, at least we can educate someone, a child, on what a BDA is, or on what a stormwater treatment wetland looks like, or why water conservation is important, and we want to improve water quality and quantity across the state, things like that. It also highlights how interconnected we are. You're talking about like how everything upstream of you funnels to you, and there's only so much you can do to fix what you have. Yeah. And that's kind of the case for all of us. Yeah. We're all a product of our environment. And you can put in a ton of energy to overcome your environment. If you're in a bad environment or a toxic environment, it takes a ton of energy to overcome that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same within your setting. If you're in an environment and in a situation that is polluted or toxic, it's going to take a ton of investment, energy, and money to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you work with others around you to improve your environment, right, before, upstream, downstream, and around you, it frees up the burdens that might otherwise be on you that you could then invest in yourselves. So in this case, invest in the nature center, invest in the water quality, invest in reintroducing native fish into that, or creating a community fishery with that clean now water.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to rely on the impact of others around you on that environment.
Mm-hmm.
The same goes for in the Ogden Way. We talk about creating an environment for success, having access to opportunities. It's the same thing. If we create an environment that's vibrant and safe and healthy, and that we act as connectors for people to take advantage of the opportunities we're creating in this community, it creates a much better environment, and then they can put a lot more energy. Like, we're all limited in how much energy we have,
mm-hmm.
how much resource we have, and investment and time, talent, or treasury.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could put it into yourself to upskill and up earn. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can put it into each other instead of having to focus on overcoming those deleterious environmental factors, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, a big push for why we want to improve water quality at the Nature Center is ultimately our water goes to the Great Salt Lake. And we're seeing a lot of impacts of drought at the Great Salt Lake. So, it's important, and it's a huge wildlife habitat that we want to protect.
Right.
So even though we're just a small little parcel of Utah, we know we influence the Great Salt Lake, so we want to.
Every one of us does.
Yeah.
Again, we all play a role.
Right.
We're all in this together. So you really can't think about yourself without thinking about everyone else around us,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, and we need everybody to have that mindset, including at the Nature Center, because the Great Salt Lake's a globally important resource.
Yeah, absolutely. What major conservation issues do you see in Ogden or in northern Utah? Anything of concern to you?
So certainly the Great Salt Lake, right?
Yeah.
So when I was at the Division of Wildlife, the last job I had, I supervised operations in all of northern Utah, and that included the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program. And that's a project that has a lot of ecologists and limnologists and just resource experts that are focused on the management of a globally significant resource and stopover. I mean, we have millions of shorebirds that visit there. Globally important migration route for waterfowl as they move north to south and south to north. So a huge food resource for eared grebes, millions of eared grebes. It's one of the biggest collections of eared grebes in the world. So while that lake is not in Ogden proper, it's absolutely impacted by Ogden. And so we need to be like, we're venturing on the biggest infrastructure project in the history of our city that's already been done once. We're going to do it again, where we're replacing our water line that's been leaking millions of gallons of water per day into the groundwater, never making it to the lake.
Right.
Ending up in playas in people's backyards and basements eventually,
Right.
probably, frankly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we are committing to fix that water line, and the state committed to help us financially, and in return we're committed to put the savings in water into the lake directly. And so that was something I negotiated in my first few weeks, couple months of my job, was to make that kind of a partnership at the state level to make sure that we are not just accounting for the infrastructure project, we're also accounting for the savings and conservation of water, and then putting that water to direct beneficial use at the lake in return for help doing the project. And frankly, that's something that I learned in my career is don't just come asking for a handout. And I remember the speaker that I was telling me, Mayor, you're not coming here asking for a handout. You're here offering a partnership, and you're offering something for the people of Utah. And he really appreciated that. And that is frankly the Utah way. And that's why I'm talking a lot about the Ogden way, because that's where I learned it. That's Utah's secret sauce. And we're trying to make it Ogden's secret sauce, because
Right.
it always has been, and it can be even more so. So the Great Salt Lake's a huge concern. I think every city needs to be really serious about the work that we're doing. I know that we're doing a lot, but there's more we can do. we'll be continuing to look at our ordinances around landscaping, particularly around new development, making sure that we're having as much of a conservation impact as possible for the new development we do. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the big ones, with the lake always being the benefactor of the work we do. Try not to be a detractor for the lake either, right?
Yeah. What about, I know one issue that it's very evident in Utah is air quality. We have some of the worst air quality in certain days in the whole world even. So any thoughts on that?
So in terms of air quality, and this is something we talked a lot about in the campaign because it's really directly related to tailpipes. In our air shed. It really comes down to the number of tailpipes and the quality or non-quality of the air coming out of those tailpipes. So the best thing that we can do as a city to reduce tailpipes on the road or the miles put in vehicles that produce all those emissions is to create a walkable, connected community, to make sure that we've got access to economic opportunities near home, to make sure that for access to those opportunities that they have access for transportation that is mass transit or renewable, whatever, to make sure that there's active transportation opportunities and infrastructure. That's the role that a city plays in terms of reducing the impact of our emissions on each other and on our health. We don't have a strong regulatory role at all.
Right.
That's at the county or at the state level, and so in terms of our community planning, we're going through a general plan process that is actively designing the built-out environment that we are creating for ourselves for a number of years, making sure that one of the words that continues to come up throughout that discussion is sustainability and air quality, and minimizing our impact on the natural world around us is all part and parcel to the sustainability of our community in the future. And so it's critical that we plan our city in a way that invites active transportation, shorter jaunts to economic opportunity, right? And where there is a commute required, to have opportunities for active transportation and also mass transit, so that we can consolidate our trips and have less and less impact on our airshed. And the role that we're playing to put water in the lake also helps to make sure that we are arresting fugitive dust,
right,
that can be laced with carcinogens and various toxins, right? So that come summertime when there's wind and et cetera,
I know
that we're not putting Great Salt Lake dust in the air. And so we're doing our part as well to put a lot of water in the lake. Certainly it's not going to fill it all in one shot, but we are definitely doing our part more than any other city that I'm aware of to put water in the lake.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like we had talked about the great access to all the mountains, and that's partly why we have such poor air quality, is just the geography of the state, where these mountains kind of trap some of that air pollution. And often you hear people that just accept that as what it is. But in my position of conservation, I feel like, okay, well, that might be the way it is, but there's no need for us to pump more pollutants into the air then, just because we have this barrier. We can't just accept it. And
so both things are right.
Right.
Our mountains are our mountains.
Yes.
Not going to change that. But getting back to all the things I already mentioned, those are the things that we can do as a city,
right,
to minimize our pollutants in the air, right?
Yeah.
And we need a regular cycle of weather events as well to shake things up.
Yep.
When we go through long periods without it. Again, something we don't have direct control over.
Nope.
But I feel like I do hear a lot of people say things like, oh, that's beyond our scope, and therefore we do nothing. That's not the answer either, right? And so every community, every person, if we're all doing things that we can do to help, and there's always things more that I could be doing personally, but if we're not taking that mindset of we all have a role to play, then it gets us to the mindset of none of us have a role to play, and then nothing happens, and then you end up in a terrible spot, right?
Yeah.
And I think that as a community, we value our outdoor spaces more than that. And we're going to make sure that we do as much as we can within economic reason I mean, if we do things that don't have a big return on benefit and they're really expensive, that's not something I want to support because our people can't afford that. Right. So I look really closely at the impact financially on families versus the impact ecologically or environmentally on families. Right. And if we're going to spend a lot, it has to come with a lot.
Yeah. And it's hard to put that value. I mean, putting a value on natural resources is tough.
It is.
Yeah.
Sometimes, in a lot of times, you just can't. So you have to put value on. There is no value. It is completely, like, priceless. Our lives, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you can look at all the economic values, recreational values, spiritual values. How are you supposed to quantify that? Or just personal, value of a natural space.
You can't quantify it, and that's why it's all included under the framework of the Ogden Way, is because it's all of those things that create quality of life. And really, wherever we are plugging into each one of those, if for example, stable neighborhoods is one of the pillars of the Ogden Way, well, that means something different for everybody. And it also is different for everybody depending on where they are on their socioeconomic journey.
Absolutely.
That could just be having a roof over your head, period. All the way to having your dream home, right, in your dream neighborhood. But those sort of things sometimes don't come with a dollar value, but doesn't mean they don't have value. And you really can't put a dollar value on my spiritual happiness and mental health, right? But what's more important than our well-being? Right? And so all of those things are captured into the framework of the Ogden Way because they all contribute part and parcel to a quality of life and an environment that people enjoy and have access to opportunities. Any more questions?
No. I
Make it through your list?
Yep.
All right. Well, I hope I didn't let you down.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I told you that was more than an email.
Right.
Yep. But I think it's important that we talk to each other, that we don't just talk at each other. And I felt like if I was going to send you an email with a long explanation, I guess it's better than no response.
Yep.
But we have a policy here that we respond to everybody. And so I'm glad we responded this way. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So for everybody watching, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for learning more about the Ogden Way, but also about the Ogden Nature Center.
Yep.
And thanks for being here to interview me. Good job.
Thanks.
Yep. And for a call to action, we end every show with a call to action. I would encourage people to get to know each other and listen to each other and to not do it over text or email only. If you have a chance to pick up the phone, do it. Phone calls are becoming more and more infrequent, right? Even better if you can visit with your friends or your neighbors or people that you don't know and you need to get to know better, particularly someone that is opposed to your opinion or who shares a differing opinion. That's something that's being lost in our nation, right? And it's important that we make it a priority to talk to each other like this instead of talking past each other.
Yeah, invite them onto a podcast.
There you go. That's what we do. We've got a long list of guests, and we're happy to have you today with us. So if you are watching this episode, get out and get active, get involved, get connected with your friends, with your neighbors, find people that you don't necessarily agree with, and actually have a conversation. And you might be surprised what you learn, right? You might actually find that you have a lot of commonalities in what you share as important.
Yep.
So that's our call to action for today, and that's our episode, and it's a wrap. Thanks.